Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Welcome to Agay with your host, Warasa Zainab. Today we're going to talk about family relationships and how it impacts our mental health. We have a fantastic guest on the show today, Brother Nadir Khan, who is joining us from South London. He is a family systemic psychotherapist and has been working in this field for quite some time, offering mental health support to the local community, to the criminal justice system, people from Muslim faith community, and inshallah he'll be discussing more about his personal experiences with mental health and how he chose the field of mental health. Assalamu alaikum, Brother Nadir. Welcome to the show.
Walaikum salam wa rahmatullah. Good to be with you.
So let's dive into the topic because this is quite a broad topic and most people are affected in one way or the other. Some people do seek professional help when it comes to family relationships and problems and issues. But then we have the other category of people who are living in a state of denial and they don't seek professional help. So as a family systemic therapist, please tell me about the nature of the work that you do.
Okay. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. Yeah, so it's family therapy. I think is a school of psychotherapy which is quite misunderstood. I think a lot of people don't really understand what it is and how it compares to the other kind of types of therapy. But so it might be worth going into a little bit of historically how it developed, if that's okay.
Yeah. Please, yeah.
So basically, the founders of family therapy looked at nature. They looked at systems in terms of engineering. The early kind of formulation of family therapy was through cybernetic metaphors. So basically, looking at how systems are connected and how they affect each other. Gregory Bateson, one of the early founders of family therapy, he looked at nature and how everything is connected within nature and how again, how things affect each other. And these kind of principles were applied to families. And systemic or family therapy came about to challenge the notion that the problem or mental health problems reside within the individual and actually say that they're actually connected within the systems and the family and the wider systems, meaning society or, even things like politics or religion, all of those things are affecting the way that the systems interact. So as family therapists, we look at the relationships that serve to either maintain or influence whatever's going on, whether that's a mental health condition or people within the family trying to reorganize themselves after a major family event like a bereavement or, a divorce or something like that. So I think one of the fundamental differences is that systemic psychotherapists look at the relationship and that in relation to whatever's going on, rather than just the individual in isolation, of whatever's going on within them individually. So it looks at problems differently in that sense.
Yeah. It's this field.
Sorry, I lost you for a bit there. Marissa, could you repeat that?
I'm interested to know about your own personal struggles, the things that you have experienced in life, in relation to mental health.
Sure. So I grew up in a family, quite a turbulent kind of childhood. Within my family, there was alcoholism, there was domestic violence. So I had experience of that from quite a young age. And over time, as I grew older, I realized the kind of influence on that, on my own kind of emotional well-being and relationships. And I particularly, I suppose, as a teenager, and then sorry, am I still with you? I don't know if I'm still connected.
Sorry, I think I lost connection just for a second. So
Okay.
So is that something that kind of motivated you to go into that field and be able to serve other people who may be in similar situations?
Definitely. I think particularly, I mean, the childhood experiences I had, and I suppose how they impacted my own mental health, particularly as a teenager and an older adult. I developed depression, and my experience of kind of going through that and seeking therapy myself, and led me to kind of and ultimately a divorce. Let me kind of motivate me to look at myself and explore my own mental health, and then also open the avenue to go into the field of mental health and counselling, and through that I decided to specialize in family therapy. And I think definitely, as a lot of therapists are, they're motivated by their own experiences. It was the same for me. It was through a desire to understand myself and my own context as well as help others. I saw my experience as a strength that I could bring in to my work as a therapist.
You mentioned that you went for therapy yourself at a point in life when you felt there was a need to get that kind of support. How was it
Mm.
beneficial to you? How did it impact you? How did it change your life?
Well, I mean, initially it took quite a while to find a good fit with the therapist. I think in when I was a teenager or just an adult coming early adulthood, there wasn't as many services that are available now. I think the whole taboo around mental health was a lot more than it is now. So I think once I did find a therapist that I felt comfortable with, for me, I wanted a therapist of the same gender as well, because I felt more comfortable to open up to another male. I found that really quite transformational in the sense that it was a space where I could explore those kind of things that I'd been keeping myself to for such a long time, and also with another person who perhaps had shared similar challenges, or could appreciate my perspective, particularly as a Muslim man, because my therapist was a Muslim as well. I think it was quite difficult to find a Muslim therapist at the time, but I think that's really what made the difference, was the faith perspective being part of the therapeutic process. I think that's what I had been looking for, as well as the fact that he was a male. I think those two factors were really important, and I think they are barriers to a lot of Muslims, as you're aware, to accessing therapy. Is having an Islamic worldview being appreciated as part of that process is central to how we look at the world and contextualize our problems, our life problems and our families and our relationships.
I think the first step is to acknowledge that there is a problem. So, if I may ask you, when did you feel that there is something wrong, or there's something that's not going right and I need to do something about it, I need to take action?
Mm. Well, yeah, reflecting back, I think there were kind of warning signs, particularly at school. I think I found it quite difficult. My emotions were kind of very kind of up and down. But I think particularly as you grow older and as you go through kind of life cycle stages, and you have to have relationships, you realize you come into situations where you're kind of challenged, or your boundaries are challenged. And I think those were moments that I found particularly difficult. I remember in particular, I think in my 20s, finding it difficult to control my anger and having periods of anger and quite low depression as well. And then after I got married, that was still present, and it affected the relationship to some extent as well. And I think the real kind of transformational period was when I got divorced, because I had to move country. My father passed away at the same time, and I had to kind of rebuild my life. I lost custody of my children as well, so I basically lost a lot of what was important to me, and then I had to rebuild things. I had to look at myself in the mirror, and I had to rebuild my life. And I think that was a very difficult period, but alhamdulillah, was such a blessing, because through that experience, Allah, provided me with an opportunity to really kind of rebuild things and take my life in a different direction. So yeah, that was
Thank
the
you.
main kind of.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And it just makes me think about so many points here. One is the fact that when you go through something like this, when you experience something like this, which is quite traumatic in itself, and sometimes you may feel isolated, sometimes you may feel that people are unable to understand what you're going through, and especially with bereavement, loss of relationship, loss of loved one, it can really take its toll. And for a person to be resilient, you do need some sort of support, some sort of, you know, emotional support that can help you move on. And like you mentioned, that what you went experienced previously, there was a lot of resentment, anger, because we all know that frustration leads to anger. And when you don't do enough healing work on yourself, then it tends to impact other relationships and other people around you. So sometimes the problem may be with just one person in the family, but every single member of that family gets affected. Do you see that a
Sure.
lot in clients when they approach you?
Definitely. I think because of the nature of life and how we are all very busy doing different things, within the household, people have different priorities, different perspectives. Oh, I've lost you again, I think.
No, no, no. Continue speaking. It's fine.
Oh, sorry.
I can hear you.
The camera
Yeah.
did. Yeah. So people have, different priorities. Parents are busy working, or, maybe because of, depending on the particular context, perhaps they are, like a recent family I've been seeing, that they're immigrants. So their focus is on just kind of providing and getting the children educated, and then for children, their focus on their education, a lot of pressure for them to perform. Um, so there's very little time to spend where families get together and have these kind of quality conversations, or quality time together, where they can talk about how they are feeling or what their perspectives are on different things. It kind of gets pushed to the side. And there are also a lot of worries and fears that both parents and children have in sharing. What will happen if I share my fears or my worries, or, so the family is like, if we look at it as an organism, it will do what it needs to do to keep everything stable. But often that within that stability, a lot of things fall through the cracks, and aren't addressed, and they kind of are presented later on,
Yeah.
through conflict within the family, through mental health conditions, or particularly at major life events. Then you can really see, things breaking down. So those are the kind of issues that some of the kind of issues that we'll see within the therapy room with families.
Yeah. You mentioned another very important point is the fact that our Muslim community in general, when it comes to seeking professional help from a counselor or a therapist, it's always like an added benefit if you have a mental health professional who can speak in your language, who belongs to the same culture, same faith group. Why do you think it's
Mm-hmm.
important? Why can't we just go to someone who maybe who belongs to a different culture, different religious background? Why is it more easy to communicate and relate to someone who is in a similar position than we are?
I think ultimately it's about epistemology, or our worldview. How do we look at the world, as Muslims? As you know, we view this life and our relationships within the framework of our faith and revelation, and the example of the Prophet Muhammad SAW and the Quran. That's how we relate to these things, how we contextualize them. So to deal with them in a secular framework, away from those things, it will always feel detached, and it will reduce the meaning that it has, in the therapy process. Muslims will always want, their faith to be considered, and they would want to understand the challenges that are facing, whether it's a bereavement, or whether it's something around gender or sexuality, or whether it's to do with relationships, or, life events. How do they contextualize that within an Islamic framework, within, life and the afterlife, and examples in the Quran and the life of the Prophet Muhammad SAW? How, they're thinking, where do I fit in all of this? Does my experience relate to that? As well as, culturally as well, because there are important traditions and cultures that, and that are particular to the family, that get passed on from generation to generation. And I think we aren't aware of the influence of those things unless we talk about them, or unless we explore them in therapy a lot of the times, because they're just taken as a given. For example, you can have certain family beliefs, or sometimes they call them family myths, where there are certain lessons that are passed on through the generations, but that for children, they don't really feel, they don't really understand, or and it's just about appreciating the different perspectives and what is helpful and it's hindering people from getting on within the family, and also developing a sense of identity for young people and context. I mean, particularly living in the West as Muslims of a different culture in a Western context, how can they find their place and unpick all of these different levels of what makes them who they are? And the family therapy is really an ideal way of doing that. And by going through that process, it helps the young person as well. It helps the parents understand, and they both sides feel appreciated. Culture gets addressed, the importance of culture, but it, as well as the young person and their kind of mixed heritage and how that impacts on them. And that's kind of what we do and how we explore culture and faith. And that's why it's important, because otherwise it can be a barrier, to relationships.
Definitely. Yeah. So currently you're working with CAMS, Child, Adolescent and Family Mental Health Services, and alongside you're also running a private practice offering psychotherapy to people in need. If you focus on our community, on the needs of our community specifically, what are the most common issues, or what are the most prevalent problems within the family structure that you come across on a regular basis?
I think we still have a lot to do in terms of educating families about mental health and the impact of that on young people and relationships. I think there's still, alhamdulillah, it's a lot better than it used to be. And, people like yourself and other organizations are helping to make it, part of, the common kind of discourse within our communities. But within families, I think we're still in the process of developing those skills to talk about and understand emotional intelligence and the influence of, for young people, the influence of social media. And I think the generational differences,
Yes.
And cultural differences for those that are first and second generation immigrants to the UK. I think that those are some of the issues. I think for young people as well, the stigma of being Muslim in a Western society and, trying to fit in, but also trying to work out their identities. I think that's a huge dilemma for young people, and the weight of expectations that social media and, contemporary kind of life places on them, the educational expectations that their parents place on them to be, perfect. And I think it's unbearable a lot of the time for young people. So that's another issue. I think communication is a huge one as well. How parents and their children communicate and not realizing what is helpful and what's unhelpful in that process, and just listen, the basic skills of listening to each other and being able to really empathize with the other. Because a lot of times, with the best of intentions, parents will try and offer answers, or they will try and encourage, or they'll, with the intention of trying to get their children to where they feel they need to get to, without really listening to them and empathizing with their experience and really stepping in their shoes, so they feel heard and their experiences and emotions are validated. I think that's a huge area as well that we need to work on in our communities. I think as well, faith as well, it really understanding what Islam is, and how it's, and what's cultural and what's not cultural, and also the nuances as well within our faith, that actually it's not black and white. There is a lot of there's a spectrum. And really that's where most of our issues are, in the grey, and it's appreciating the grey. And alhamdulillah, in our Islamic tradition, the scholarship that we've inherited, there's lots of knowledge to benefit from in all of these areas, when it comes to emotional intelligence, when it comes to relationships, how to communicate, how to view, even contemporary issues like sexuality, or spirituality. All of those things are in our tradition. It's just about looking in the right places and exploring them and being open to
Yes.
them. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, Alhamdulillah, a lot of work is being done in our community in regards to mental health. And you mentioned sexuality, and I just remember there's this organization called Strong Support, and they're doing a fantastic job in providing support to the Muslim members of the community who are struggling with their orientations. Um, so
Hmm.
yeah, we need to educate our community. We need to do a lot of work, break away from the stereotypes and the stigmas that exist, and like you highlighted, some of the issues that are quite prevalent in our society, and we really need to kind of work on that. So, what's the best way forward? For example, you mentioned communication gap or issues with the older generation and the younger generation coming together and working together. What
Yeah.
can we do? What options do we have?
I think we need to tackle the challenges from a number of levels. I think, first of all, in terms of education, I think we need more therapists, more Muslim therapists. I would say particularly more Muslim family therapists. I would encourage, we don't have many Muslim family therapists. I would say even Muslim male family therapists or male therapists in general. I would encourage
Yes,
um,
that's
those
another thing.
those yeah. I mean, I encourage Muslims in general to get involved in therapy because we have so much to offer as Muslims, I think, and our
Yeah.
Islamic tradition. But I think particularly males, there's a real dearth of male therapists and a lot of demand within the community for people wanting to see male therapists and not feeling comfortable, unless they have that available. So I think we need that. In terms of training as well, I think we need to, as professionals, those within the field, to be developing therapeutic interventions that are centered in Islamic epistemology and Islamic ontology, and that to be, and we should be proud and at the forefront of that movement. I know that there is a lot of development in Islamic psychology at the moment
Yes,
in
yes,
that area. Yeah, but I think it's still we're still in the infancy of that, and I think that needs to be done at all levels. And
yes,
I think particularly in systemic psychotherapy, we have the Islamic tradition has a lot to offer in terms of how we view family and relationships, and how we everything is connected. With our relationship with Allah Subhanahu wa Taala, and how our family relationships are viewed within the Quran and the Hadith. And marital relationships and sibling relationships, all of that is contained within our tradition. So I think that needs to be part of our training, and we need to make it the mainstream. I think that's really important. So then the services that are created and delivered meet the needs of our Muslim community. So I say that's really important. We need to do research as well.
yes,
And I know, alhamdulillah, that there is research being done, but there's still lots to be done on whatever specialisms, whether it's addiction, within the Islamic framework, whether it's couples relationships, whether it's specifically mental conditions within the Islamic framework. I think we need to do that. What else do we need
and
within
research is something which is highly recommended by Allah in the Quran as well, to do research, to learn, to grow as a person, and not to be stagnant in life. So that's again something which is highly recommended in our faith,
definitely, definitely, and
but unfortunately gets ignored a lot. When it comes to self care, psychological well being, it's something that gets ignored all the time.
I think it reflects on how we see ourselves as Muslims within the Western context and society. I think we do find ourselves often on the back foot and having to apologize, for whatever is happening, in the name of Islam, where actually we should be proud of our heritage, and that should actually be what we should be presenting to both our Muslim community and the non-Muslim community, to show that actually we can offer a perspective and solutions to a lot of these the ills, societal ills, and we should be proud of that, and that should be part of whatever field we're engaged in. We should be looking to have that as our contributions, as the khulafa of Allah on the earth. That's our responsibility, in whatever capacity we're able to do that, whether it's something small, it doesn't have to be something huge, just to offer that, and do our bit to contribute towards society, and engage that, and through we learn about ourselves, we learn about our families, we learn and we develop our connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through that process as well. So it's not a one-way process, you know. It's very much, I'm sure, same with you, through this, you know, these conversations and through actually delivering therapeutic interventions. It's very much a self-reflexive, what you about yourself through your clients, and then you develop, and it's just an ongoing process, and also opens insights and in many different ways. So it's all, alhamdulillah, it's such a blessing to be in this field.
No, there's no doubt about that, that alhamdulillah, we have a pool, a treasure of knowledge when it comes to the human psyche, when it comes to Islam. Islam has emphasized so much on nafs and the types of nafs and how it kind of rules our body and our mind and our soul. And we just need to do more research on that. And I think a lot of things are quite similar in modern therapeutic interventions and the guidelines that were provided by the prophets of Allah. And you also highlighted a lot of problems, for example, when it comes to relationships within the family members, our siblings, our spouses. And if we look at the lives of the prophets, they all experienced something. They all went through trials and tribulations. Hazrat Nuh was tested through his wife and his son. Then we have, Hazrat Maryam alayhi salam. She was tested by the community that kind of ganged up against her. We have Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who was also boycotted by the local community. He experienced so many things. So if we keep that in front of us and learn how to be more resilient, how to build our connection, strengthen our connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then I think everything and anything is possible. But at the same time, one shouldn't feel ashamed or scared to seek help. I mean, it's okay to be not okay. And that's something we really need to kind of, spread awareness about within our community, because there are so many families, and I'm sure you know this because you are in this field, you deal with people who are suffering on a daily basis, suffering in silence, and they have no outlet. And because of the problems they're experiencing in their family relationships, they develop other mental health conditions like depression or anxiety or any other disorder. So do you see that a lot in your clients who present one problem, but then because of that, it has impacted all other areas of their life?
Sure, everything is connected. And I mean, to go back to what we were saying earlier, in terms of the Quranic discourse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asks us to look at, his creation and reflect upon how all these things are connected. So he will ask you to look at nature. He will ask you to look at the husband and the wife, and the male and the female. He asks us to look at the tribes and the nations and the languages that we, and those differences, and as ayat, as sign of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but also to reflect upon them and how they connect us together, and the similarities and the differences. And we can look at the Islamic tradition as examples of how we deal with difficulties, and how we deal with each other as spouses, our rights and responsibilities, but also the love, and the importance of love within those relationships in the Islamic tradition. But yeah, I mean, definitely, if things are left unaddressed, over time they will get worse, and they will influence the family in different levels. Because for example, if someone within the family was parented in a particular way, they will develop certain coping strategies according to that, and then those coping strategies will be passed on to other generations. And in certain contexts, they're not going to work. Or, maybe if they've immigrated to Turkey, then they're faced with a different kind of context. Then culturally, it's going to be different, and then it's going to pose challenges. And a lot of this gets passed down through generations without it, without us knowing, because it just kind of happens. Yeah. It's just life. But the longer the left, the more ingrained they can be if they're left unexamined. And within therapy, when you can explore, for example, within the family, what's the hierarchy within the family? Who is in the top position? Is is the one who's really dictating everything? If so, what's the influence on that on the rest of the family, and how things are organized? If should it remain the same, or can we adjust things as people get older? Those transitions into the life cycle stages can influence how their coping strategies are, or how you relate to each other. Like, for example, the way you relate to a teenager is not the same that you'd relate to someone who's going into adolescence, let's say. And often parents will apply the same strategies they did with it as when the children are young to when they're adults. So it's kind of being aware of the change and applying different strategies for different contexts and different age groups. And also, I mean, things like bereavement. Some families they don't talk about it, or maybe they'll just kind of deal with it all separately, and that way it influences the way they relate to each other. And even taboo topics like sex, families won't discuss it, and it will just, then children are left to kind of discover for themselves, and then this can create problems because the taboo takes precedence over. And again, that's not in our tradition, Islamic tradition. Prophet Muhammad talked about things and educated, the Sahaba about the, about these issues.
Intimate partner relationships.
Yeah. So
let's take a short break, and then inshallah come back and explore this further. And if our viewers have any questions to ask, any feedback or comments, they can always call in our studio or leave their feedback and questions on our Hidayat TV Facebook and YouTube page. Stay tuned. We'll join you shortly. Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum. Once again, welcome back to the show. Today we're talking about family relationships and how it impacts our mental health. And we have Brother Nadir Khan with us, who is a family systemic psychotherapist and has been working in the field of mental health for quite a long time. Before going on the break, Brother Nadir, we were talking about intimate partner relationships and how Islam has given guidelines and how it has been highlighted in the Quran and the books of Hadith, and how it is a taboo topic and how we don't talk about it, and lots of people suffer in silence and remain in unhappy relationships, unfulfilling and meaningless relationships, but they don't address the main issue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So, do you get a lot of clients who come to you who are at the verge of having a relationship breakdown, and they feel that like divorce is the last option because they don't want to work on the underlying issues of the relationships? Is that the case?
Yeah, I would say you get a variety. You get, couples that are just got married that are having problems, in the first couple of years of relationships, and then you have couples that perhaps have been together for a period of time and starting to grow apart, and then you have, couples that are married, children well established, but they're really been struggling for things for some time and seeking help. So each situation requires a different kind of approach, I suppose. As to what we were talking about before, in I think appreciating the differences of the two families that come together when they do get married, and I think we can often have a bit of a romanticized idea of what marriage is supposed to be like, and it's sometimes difficult to have those difficult conversations before you actually get married to see whether or not you are compatible in your goals, in your personality, in your sense how attracted you are to each other. And a lot of those times, for whatever reason, maybe because of parental pressure or cultural differences or just attraction, you're taking that can all kind of get left or delayed until later, and then the problems will manifest, within relationships later on.
Yeah, although that's quite contradictory to the teachings of Islam, because if you look at our history, even the marriage of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam with Lady Khadija al-Kubra, it wasn't something that was completely arranged in the sense that two strangers came together, but it was built on mutual trust, respect, and then they decided to get married. But we see that our society, culture tends to dominate more than religion itself. And we have kind of made the cultural rituals and traditions almost obligatory upon us, and we are neglecting the actual teachings and the true essence of our faith, which is based on compassion and, like you said, mental compatibility and all of those things.
Yeah, I mean, culture has its place. I mean, not all culture is bad culture. Some cultures, aspects of culture, of course, they serve to preserve family life and encourage, family connection. But some can be an impediment to, to establishing good relationships and marriages. And like you said, we need to look to examples from, the prophetic tradition of what that should look like, and also that there are, again, there is a spectrum of things that you don't have to rush into marriage. You can have a period of engagement. You can to really see, if you're chaperoned with the family, you can meet each other and really kind of assess whether you are compatible. Whether you have a similar outlook, whether the qualities are really what you're looking for. You look at the families as well to see whether there is compatibility there as well. Relationships, you get to observe those things, and really for both parties to be able to make an informed decision, which is ultimately, I mean, there is a lot. You won't know the person until you're married and you live together. That's when that's when you really, the rubber hits the road, and there will naturally, just like anything in life, there will be challenges, but at least if the framework is there from the beginning, you have that understanding of how things will be once you are together. So yeah.
So what options are there for couples who are experiencing difficulty within their relationship? Say whether it's because of the differences that they have amongst themselves, maybe they're not mentally compatible, maybe they're on two separate pages in life in general. Is there hope for them? Is there hope for families who are considered as dysfunctional because of the arguments that they're having on a daily basis and how it's impacting their children? And like you said, sometimes we have this transgenerational trauma that is passed down from one generation to another, and especially for children who have witnessed domestic abuse, how it impacts them.
Yeah.
So, what options are there in terms of therapy?
Yeah, I mean, if in those situations of abuse, obviously, then there has to be an intervention there where a choice needs to be made where the abuse can't continue. It needs to be reported, and the perpetrator needs to be getting support around how to manage that anger and take responsibility for that. But at the same time, within within that, there is a relational process that takes place that kind of is, which is a precursor to that violence, which is really at the core of the issue. And those are to do with, insecurities or emotions, or maybe certain beliefs about themselves or about the family that maybe hasn't been talked about or teased about through a discussion. Often they aren't able to have these discussions because things will get blown out of proportion and then get angry. But within the therapy room, you can, if you slow down the conversation and you're able to really pace the way couples speak to each other through kind of listening and the other, like sending and receiving, for example. So one person will speak and share and maybe allocate time to have those kind of quality conversations, and you will coach them through this process as a therapist. And so one person will speak and the other one will listen and mirror back what the other one is saying and validate what they're saying, rather than interpret what they think the other person is saying or act defensively or provide solutions. So it's basically unpicking all those barriers for each party to feel that they're safe enough to communicate. Because what usually happens is that, they'll try and communicate what their feelings are. The other person will either ignore or they'll judge, and then that will create like an attachment injury. One way of putting it, that they'll feel not safe then to share with them again, and there will just be a wall that divides them both, and the wall will just get bigger and bigger unless it's addressed. So I mean, as a therapist, I always have to be hopeful, and I have seen couples that have had, considerable difficulties, even domestic violence, rekindle their relationship because of the love that they have for each other. That actually was the reason and the foundation of why they got together in the first place. There was, you're able to revisit what it was like when you first met, and that kind of that intimacy and that love that you shared. And that being very healing. If you can get back to that place, that can, over time, it can heal a lot of the hurt that's occurred, and they can kind of move forward, with a new kind of future, new vision for the future, and a new commitment to each other. So there is hope. There are also cases when couples come to you and really they've already made their decision for one party or the other that they don't want to continue in, and maybe your role as a therapist is to support them through that process of separation and consider the impact of that on them as a couple, and the logistical issues and the emotional impact on the children as well. So, I think as Muslims as well, divorce is permissible, but it's the, abghad al-halal, it's the most disliked of the halal. So we have to be mindful of how we position ourselves as therapists to do what's best for the family, and even though we don't like to see families break up, sometimes that is the best option, and it's permissible in Islam as well.
Of course.
So it's difficult, but it's what we do. It's part of the work we do, and imams as well.
So how do you deal with clients who come to you and they talk about their experiences, and the problem is not with them, but say, for example, another person in the family or their spouse, but that person is not willing to come forward and seek professional help. They're not ready for counseling. They're not ready for therapy. They are like, oh, we don't need this. We're okay. But the problem is right there, and it's getting from bad to worse, but they're still kind of adamant that they will not disclose it to anyone, either an imam, a local scholar, or a therapist. What do you do then? Like, how do you offer your help?
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing much you can do if the person isn't motivated to come into therapy and work on those things. Our duty, Allah says in the Quran, وَمَا عَلَيْكَ إِلَّا الْبَلَاغُ, that it's only for you to make the belief, to tell them about it, and then the other person has to decide whether or not they want to engage or not. I mean, one approach as a family therapist, if and I've done this with families before, if I have one example, although this is a bit different because it's a child and she has autism. so she doesn't feel safe to come into the therapy room. So what we do the therapy with the remainder of the family, and what we do, we try and create change within the family. Even though she's not in the room, we'll try and bring her voice into the room by asking how she would respond in certain situations. And then also they will able to get a sense of her perspective of the situation, or hypothesize what that could be. And what that does, it creates change within the family without that person even being in the therapy room. Because, I mean, depending on the context, but in this one, it wasn't required, even though you'd expect it if this the person has been referred, But actually, alhamdulillah, a lot of change a lot of progress has happened without her being in the therapy room, just from the parents and her sister reflecting on their own perspective around, autism spectrum disorder, their own kind of understanding of how, the pressure that's on, expectations for academic success, and also the impact of their own upbringing on how they perceive their daughter and how they relate to each other. For example, the father is very kind of stoic. He'll keep himself to himself. He's not very expressive. Whereas the mum, in this case, needed that feedback, that emotional connection. That was so much of her childhood experience, and it's part of her that she really needed. And they weren't, once they were aware of it, they hadn't really talked about it. So through these kind of discussions, we've explored ways where they can both feel connected in their different kind of styles of their love languages, if you want to call them that. Being aware of that, then they can take care of each other. And also, like for mum, in this case, she can spend some time taking care of herself, even if it's not within the family, because they're not so expressive with their emotions. She can go to her own family and take care of herself there. So
Sorry,
there are ways of
I have
working.
to interrupt you. We have a caller online. We'll just take this call, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.
Sure.
Welcome to Agahi. Can you hear me? Oh, I think we've dropped the call.
Okay.
Please continue.
Yeah. So we're just saying that there are ways of working, in certain contexts without the main person being referred being there. You can still work with the rest of the family, and there are combinations. In family therapists can work. For example, if you have a family, you can work with the parents, you can work with the children individually, or the parents individually, or you can work with mum and the daughter. There's different combinations that you can have in the therapy room to work with.
Yeah. In terms of the best treatment intervention out there for parents who are struggling with their children who are, say, for example, being abused by or neglected by their parents, or couples who are experiencing difficulty, what is the most, successful form of therapy out there for them? Like the best treatment intervention?
It really depends on the context, because each family will it will really depend on the situation. So there's no really one size fits all. But I mean, family therapy is an evidence-based therapy. In particular, areas like eating disorders, or with even depression and certain conditions, there are evidence-based to show that it's really effective. There is a couples therapy, it's related to family therapy, called EFT as well, which is a really good couples therapy intervention, which is evidence-based, like I said, and it's really effective working with couples and kind of slowing down their communications. It's attachment-based as well, so it looks at the kind of attachment history of the couples, and it works at kind of building their trust and intimacy with each other through that as well. I'm trying to think what others there are. For really, families that are really in crisis and maybe in the edge of care, like with social services and that kind of thing, there is a type of family therapy called functional family therapy, which is a behavioral approach. So rather than the kind of stuff I've been talking about, which is very kind of reflective, you need people who are able to reflect on things and feel safe to do that. With functional family therapy, those families are in such crisis that anything can kick them off, and it can lead to violence or whatever. So with functional family therapy, it focuses on behaviors and changing behaviors. Within family therapy, you have different types of change. You've got first order change and second order change. So first order change would be the change in behaviors, which facilitates a change within the family and difference. It creates kind of positive change within the family. Second order change is a change in beliefs, and that requires a more of a reflective family therapy. So with it's more of the FFT is more of a therapist-led intervention, and I would take the position of an expert, and I would be very guided and directive in how I did the therapy, because that's going to be what's containing for the family. The analogy that's given is, if there's been a car crash, you're not going to sit there and ask them how are you feeling now. You're going to give them specific instructions to make sure that the crisis is managed, and that FFT is really effective at doing that. I'm a trained FFT therapist as well, so I can say that's another type of family therapy that's effective for crisis.
Thank you so much, Brother Nadir. It was absolutely wonderful talking to you about family relationships and how it impacts our mental health. I'm sure our viewers found it quite insightful as well. Thank you again, once again, for your time. We have almost finished the show. Inshallah, next Saturday we'll see you again with another topic and another brilliant guest. Till then, look after your mental health. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.